We'll now start working on the legs. In this video we'll start working on the interface and the controls for the legs. We'll need to create the solver, and for this we'll use a rig attribute VOP. To make everything simpler and easier to work with, we're going to create an interface for this node. We'll press on this gear icon and select Edit Parameter Interface. And I'll create a folder. The folder type will be set to a multi-palm block. We could choose any of these possibilities. They merely affect the layout, but in this case I'm going to choose tabs. The reason I'm using a tabbed interface is that it will match more closely with the built-in IK solver. I'll then set the first instance to be 0. Most programming languages are 0-based, so when looping over items you'll expect them to start at 0. I find the default of 1 makes scripting a little bit more difficult. I'll call this folder legs, and I prefer to keep the name and the label the same. Within the VOP node, we're going to be working with the IK solver. We're going to need to set a lot of parameters within this node, and this node also gives you a lot of ways to set these parameters. The first thing that we'll need to deal with are the target joints. These joints will be from our skeleton, and they are what will be deformed. We can set this using an array of point IDs or an array of transforms. We have even more choices with the controls. The first option is the target IDs. This is a list of point IDs, and we can also use an array of point IDs. We can also set these with matrices, and we can either set the matrices individually or we can use an array. In this case, I'm going to set the matrices individually, and I'm going to set the target with a list of target IDs. So what we'll need is our list of targets, which will be a list of points. We'll need a transform matrix for the root, another transformation matrix for the goal, and a final transformation matrix for the twist. So we'll need to add these to our interface. The first parameter we'll add for these will be a string. I'll then duplicate this 3 times so I have a string for my root, my goal, and my twist. I'll rename the first string to be target, and the label will be the same as the name. The second string will have root for both the name and the label. The next is our goal, and then the twist. There are 2 more parameters that I will include. These parameters are used to help control the solver, and these are the stretch parameter and the squash parameter. Both of these parameters will be floats, and the name and labels will be stretch and squash respectively. So now we've added all the basic controls, we can apply and we can take a look at our interface. If we scroll down, we'll find the legs option, and currently there are no parameters for this. When I set the value to 1, we'll see that the parameters now show up. So now all our strings show up, and I can fill them all in manually, but I want to make these controls a little bit more intuitive. To do this, I'm actually going to steal some information from a couple of other nodes. The nodes that I'm going to steal from are the reparent joints node and the IK chains node. I'll start by working with the reparent joints node. I'll select the node, and then I'll use Edit Parameter Interface to open its interface properties. We can get the information we need by selecting either the joint or the parent parameter, and the functionality I'm looking for will show up under the tags. The most important of these is the Script Action tab. I'll right-click on this to copy it. Make sure that you copy from the tag value and not the tag name. To reference what this script does, we can look at the reparent joints node. This button that we use to select our joints is what is driven by the script we have just copied. So I've got my copied script action, and I can return to my VOP, and we'll go to the final tab, which is the action button. I can then paste the script here. This will create a button with a script link to it, and there are a couple of ways which we can interface with this button. And the first is the action help. This is basically just a tooltip. In this case, I'll set it to select target joints. The next option is the action icon. This will define our button. This will usually be set with the icon Button Reselect. We can also select this button manually. I'll click on the gear icon. Under the locations there is an option which is H icon. When we select this directory, we'll then have a folder which is called SVG icons. If we enter this folder, we'll get the majority of the icons used in Houdini. We can basically use every single button in this menu. However, if I look under Button to Reselect, we'll see the Reselect button over here. This will give us the button. However, we do not need the entire file path. We only really need the icon's name, and in this case I'll stick with Buttons Reselect. We can then apply this to save the changes. I can now look at my interface. The button is implemented, and I should now be able to select a list of my targets. Next, I'll look at the parameters for my IK chains. When specifying the controls, I want to specify an individual item, and I want to specify it by name only. Where the reparent joints node will give me a list of items which are grouped by name, the IK change joint will give me parameters which only have the name. So I'll edit the parameter interface of the IK chains node, and I'll copy the script from the twist parameter. I can then paste this into my VOP. I'll set the action help again, and I'll set it to select root joint, and I'll copy the button again. I'll copy the script for the goal as well, and for the twist. I can then set the button, and I'll set the help to select twist joint. I'll set the icon for the goals as well, and I'll set the help to select goal joints. So I can now take a look at my final interface. I have selection buttons for all of my joints, and if we take a look at the tab, we'll see that the first tab is number 0. This is of course because I set the value of the first instance in the folder to 0. I can then start selecting my joints. I'll start with my targets, and I'll select all the points in the first leg, starting with the root and proceeding in an order down to the effector. And as you can see, I've got my selection working correctly. Next, I'll select my root control, and when I press my button, I get my selection containing all of the controls from the second input. And I want to point out now that this only works automatically because I chose the twist parameter. It would of course also have worked for the goal parameter. However, if I'd chosen any of the parameters from earlier in the node, it would not have worked. And the reason you would not get the correct behavior would be that the input index is not referring to the correct port. I can now start selecting the controls. I want to select my root first. Currently, the root is not visible, so to make this easier to work with, we'll bypass the visibility node for now. Some error messages come up. These are related to the reparent node and the IK chains node, so I just delete them quickly. I then select my goal and my twist. Since this is an insect, it has 6 legs, so I'll put in a value of 6, and then I'll select all the joints for the legs. I've now added an interface for my solver, and in the next video we'll work on the solver itself.